Okay, I am letting everyone in now. Okay, would you like to start?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Suzanne Mumford, and I'm on the board of Dementia Publishing. And this afternoon, I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of Dementia Publishing to this very important and I'm sure informative webinar with Dr. Isabelle Latham. Can I just do a little bit of housekeeping in terms of using the chat? If you can just put your questions in there rather than chatting in there, that would be great. And then Sue and I will keep an eye on that. And at the end, we'll have a Q&A and we'll try and make sure all of your questions are answered. Apart from that, I think we're nearly all there. Are we nearly all here, Beth?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to welcome Dr. Isabelle Latham. She's the researcher in residence for Hallmark Care Homes. And she's going to be talking about the paper that she had published with us, how talking mats can improve care and communication with people with dementia in care homes. So Izzy, I'm going to hand over to you.
Excellent, thank you, Suzanne. And I'm going to attempt to make the technology work. So let's see. Oh, is that working?
It is.
Fantastic. That's always a good start. Hello, everybody, and thank you for coming. I apologise in advance for my rather croaky voice, but let's all be grateful we're on Zoom and I'm not breathing my germs all over you. So it's something to be grateful for. And thank you to the Journal of Dementia Care for the opportunity to share this presentation today. So yes, as Suzanne said, I'm researcher in residence with Hallmark Care Homes, and I'm going to be talking today about the ways and the whys of how we've used talking mats within Hallmark Care Homes. And I know hopefully we have a few colleagues from Talking Mats in the group today, so they may well be able to share some of their perspectives later on as well. So the title of the presentation is How Can Talking Mats Improve Care and Communication with People with Dementia in Care Homes? So to give you sort of a little bit of a background, the vision of Talking Mats is to improve the lives of people with communication difficulties by increasing their capacity to communicate effectively about things that matter to them. Now, talking mats have been used for a long while and have been known for a long while, particularly in the world of learning disability support and autism support. But they've been less well known within dementia care. However, our head of dementia care at Hallmark got to know about talking mats and could see the possibility within dementia care. And so we wanted to explore how we might be able to use them and what impacts they might have. So I'm going to talk through the ways that we did that, the ways that we use talking mats in practice, as well as some of the impacts we've seen and the future work we might be hoping to complete. So for those of you that have never seen a talking mat before or don't really know what we're talking about, I managed to get a bit of a picture of one, which is always helpful. I think the best way to imagine it is to recognise that it's an actual physical thing that sits in front of a person. So it's about double the size of a placemat. And on that mat, you can place individual cards, which are about 10 by 10 square. And on a talking mat, across the top, you have what we refer to as a top scale. So these are the 3 yellow symbols across the top. And really you could use that top scale to illustrate a range of things. So it could mean happy and not happy with unsure in the middle. It could mean I'm able to do this and I'm not able to do this with sometimes or maybe in the middle. So your top scale can mean a range of things, but you always have those 3 options to make the conversation simple and the components of the conversation simple. And then you have options cards. So there are a range of these available from Talking Mats on a whole host of different topics, activities, health, social supports, relationships. And so before you do a talking mat with an individual, you decide in advance what the topic is going to be, what your top scale is going to be, and the likely option cards that you will use. And your card down the bottom there, where it says My Wider World, which is just the example for this mat, just highlights the overall topic of the mat that you're doing. And it's there as a constant reminder for you as the person doing the talking mat and the resident or the person you're working with as to the topic of the talking mat. So it's a very physical activity, and the facilitator, the person having the conversation, sits next to the residents and has that conversation side by side. And the idea is that this approach supports understanding by helping to break down topics and give processing time to the individual. And of course, that's something that we know is very important for people living with dementia, that it can often take longer to process ideas. And that's sometimes where they get cut out of conversation and get cut out of communication. And so something that helps us and helps me as a facilitator slow that down could therefore be helpful. It's also something that helps to support an expression of personal views and affirm a self-identity. So actually enabling the person to say very specifically who they are and what they value, rather than in perhaps the more general terms that sometimes some of our communication can take. A talking mat can also help to focus attention. And in particular, if attention is lost, the conversation itself is actually still there on the mat. And that really helps support memory and returning to the conversation. And that's probably the aspect of a talking mat that I found most useful when working with people living with dementia. Because one of the most common problems can be that someone may lose that train of thoughts in the middle of the conversation. Whereas having it physically in front of you not only gives you a way to bring them back very easily to the subject, but also shows that we haven't lost what we've already done, and gives us a chance to revise and to review what we've already done. And this idea of side-by-side listening, so that it's an activity we're doing together, as opposed to asking a series of questions off a care plan, something like that, is about reducing anxiety and making it an activity you do together, rather than perhaps the more top-heavy conversations that we can sometimes have in care. So that's what a talking mat is. In terms of our own implementation, these are the steps that we took within Hallmark. First off, a member of our team, actually our head of dementia care, became an in-house licensed and accredited talking mats trainer. And that's how the process works with talking mats. That's how you become able to deliver talking mats in your organisation. And she then took on the responsibility of training up and supporting 2 team members from every home and a few key members of our senior leadership team. And we've got 20 homes going up to 23 the middle of this year within Hallmark. So that was manageable, although often obviously took some organisation. And we tried to make sure that those team members were from a mixture of roles and departments, and set out the expectations that if those individuals were going to take on the training, they would be expected to complete talking mats with residents. And we set a target of about two talking mats a month at least. We would be wanting them to complete with people, recognising that sometimes people can be very, very keen to do training, but actually when it comes to doing the actual putting it into practice, real life can get in the way, and we don't always get what we want to out of the training investment. And we also looked at how we might record talking mats as part of care planning and our review processes. And it was actually something that our internal auditing team decided to build within their processes so they could actually monitor how many talking mats were being done, were they being used. So these were our initial steps to implementation. And this is just one quote. I mean, there are 20 or 30 I could have perhaps given to you. But in terms of how team members described what it was like to do their first talking mat and to engage with the resident using this. And this is their particular quotes. They said, the talking mats allowed us to be able to stay on the conversation by having pictures on the mat to refer to. And it was really nice one-to-one time as well. Their whole demeanour afterwards was amazing, completely different, really calm, really engaged, really alert. So yeah, we did notice the significant difference after doing that. And it was a nice protected bit of time to spend with them somewhere quiet. So these were sort of the initial feelings that many of our team members had that had the chance to engage with talking mats. Oops, sorry, just have to let people in and then move my slides on, she says. Okay, yeah. So after our implementation, we wanted to think about how we could evaluate the plans that a lot of people had and the ways that we actually ended up using talking mats. And obviously we were able to do that partly because I was in post as researcher in residence. We're quite lucky in Hallmark as a result of that. But we wanted to try and make the most of the promise that had been identified by the initial people who were trained in talking mats. There was a lot of excitement and a lot of ideas about what could be done. And we recognise that quite often that's lost. We lose that against real implementation. There's a lot of words and not always actions because real life tends to get in the way. So we wanted to use our evaluation as a way to sort of track what falls away, what sticks with us and why, so that we can maybe do some learning there, as well as identify the impacts for residents and team and to support and the support that might be required to actually keep those impacts going. And so in order to do that, we ran 2 surveys, one immediately following the training and one about 6 months later. And we also did a comparison of care plans of 18 chosen at random. And what we were looking for were indicators of change in those care plans that were related to talking mats that had been completed. And here are some of the findings. So in terms of that colourful pie chart there, one of the things we asked was for people to estimate the percentage of the residents living with dementia in their home that they felt talking mats would be useful for. So we weren't expecting anybody here to be saying 100% or even greater than 75%. And as you can see, the majority said that talking mats are relevant for about a quarter of their residents. And that's important for us to know because we need to recognise that talking mats don't work for everybody. They're suiting a subset of our residents, if you like. And that means we can't substitute talking mats for everything else we might look at in terms of supporting communication for people living with dementia, because there are many other residents for whom talking mats wouldn't be suitable. In terms of how we identified suitable residents, there was a little bit of trial and error to start with, because it wasn't the case that they would be suitable for anybody. Obviously, difficulties communicating verbally was one of the first things that would draw us towards a person. So someone who was showing significant word finding challenges, had impairments in their speech, or became easily distracted, or had shown that they were already quite helped and aided by visual prompts in the environment. But that always had to be balanced against whether it was judged the person had sufficient cognitive ability to be able to understand the mat itself, to be able to understand the simple questions and what the picture on the card might be representing. So there was a little bit of a balancing act and a sort of trial and error that a lot of the Talking Mats practitioners had to do at the start, while they started to get used to the kind of people and needs Talking Mats would be useful for. It's also something that was identified very quickly as being very helpful when we had residents who were expressing needs through behaviour. So as soon as an alert or a concern was raised about someone's behaviour, one of the first things our dementia support team could be asking is, have you done a Talking Mat with the person? Please try and do a Talking Mat with the person, and then we'll take it from there. And actually, for a lot of people, that helped to solve that behaviour and work out what was going on for that individual before we went down any other routes of unpicking that behaviour. So that was another thing that often drew us towards using a Talking Mat. And obviously it sounds very obvious, but sometimes you do have to point out the obvious in this kind of work. Residents had to have sufficient vision to be able to use the Talking Mats. And obviously when you're dealing with an older population, you are often working with some individuals with quite severe visual impairment. So we had to make sure that people were able to see the cards if they brought them close to their face and could understand from that perspective. So overall, in terms of impact, we saw good overall impacts and some very specific impacts for individuals. So in terms of overall impacts, we've seen decreases in reports of distressed behaviour from people, which suggests that we are able to communicate better with them and therefore anticipate needs or resolve needs a lot quicker. We've shown a general greater awareness of resident interests, specifically around issues like types of activities they enjoy and the ways they like to spend their day, because they're specific sort of topics that we've asked people to focus on at various points. And we've also had reports of improved relationships between team members and residents. In terms of specific impacts, it's been very heartening actually to see the kinds of specific impacts that develop, because that's what you'd want from a tool like Talking Mats. You wouldn't just want kind of generic improvements. You would want very individualized and very tailored solutions. So we've had occasions where people have been able to indicate that very specifically where they're experiencing pain or when they're experiencing pain. We had a lady who expressed that one of her favourite things to do was have her hair blow dried. So that's now part of her weekly sort of taking care of herself session. Somebody who was struggling with to watch their TV was able to communicate that the problem was in understanding the instructions when they were given verbally. So written instructions were given. There's people who've introduced having an alcoholic tipple before bedtime. We've had a hearing test organised, who've identified that their room didn't feel very welcoming, and that's why they weren't spending time in there. And so team were able to go and find items, and a whole load of other ones on there. So a real range of very specific impacts as well, which are very hard to measure in anything other than sharing those little stories, but actually immeasurable in terms of how they improve the quality of life for people living with dementia. But of course, with anything like this, there are also downsides or things that we need to be aware of. And overall, I think our finding would be they're being used, but they're perhaps not being used to their fullest potential. So of those team members that were initially trained, so we call them our pioneers, only 46% of them had been able to use them in the ways they'd hoped. They'd all managed to do the very specific tasks they'd been asked to do. But in terms of some of the more exciting things they'd wanted to do, they hadn't been able to take that further yet. And when we looked at those 18 randomly sampled care plans, only 5 had specific references to Talking Mats related changes. Now, that doesn't mean those changes weren't made, but it means that they weren't recorded in a way that linked them to Talking Mats. So that could be as much of an issue about recording practice as about talking mats practice, but it is still something that we need to be mindful of, that are we actually linking what we're doing in one area of practice to our record keeping. And in red here, you can see the barriers that were experienced around implementing, and they're fairly obvious. I think they're the kind of barriers we would expect to see, because they often come up with new interventions in care settings. People worried that they haven't got the time to actually implementing or wanting more time. People not feeling that they could make it a priority because they had so many different things to juggle. And as I touched on earlier, initially, there were some struggles perhaps with unsuitable residents being chosen for talking mats, and that leading to a little bit of sort of demotivation, because if the resident wasn't suitable for a talking mat, then obviously it didn't work, and either the resident walked away and didn't engage, or the team member wasn't able to get anything out of that session. But there were also some facilitators there that we've identified as how we might be able to move forward. So recognising that actually when there is a pressing resident need, for example, when there's this behaviour that is showing itself, that can be a real crucial time to point people towards talking mats as a way to help the person find their voice, and be able to communicate what it is that might be causing them distress. To also think of ways that we can help people to plan for that protected time, so that there are specific times and reminders from others to be using the talking mats. And that's often about how do we make sure that other members of the management team recognise that talking mats are as important as those that are trained in using talking mats, so that the general manager is reminding, have you done your talking mats this month? Are there any additional talking mats you want to do? So they're sort of the directions that have fed into what is we're focusing on for the future in Hallmark. So we've concluded that they're definitely worthwhile. And from that, we will be increasing our trained team members. And we've actually now got a few more trained facilitators, so that it's a little bit easier and quicker to roll it out. But we're also being mindful not to put all our eggs in that talking mat basket. They don't suit every resident need. And so it's not necessarily training that would be rolled out across the whole of the care team in the way that a lot of our dementia training is, for example. We want to look and constantly look for ways to reinforce their use more, perhaps via general managers, and create those protective time and tasks for their use. And one successful way we did this was by requesting that our annual survey of residents, which obviously happens every year, actually had at least 10 talking mat submissions from each care home. And that actually drastically improved the use of talking mats within the care home. And obviously the representation of the views of people living with dementia in that survey, which is very important. And over time, what we're looking at is different ways that we can support and track their transfer into care plans and long-term care planning, to make sure that they're not just something that gets done and then forgotten about. And that's the end. So over to Suzanne to sort of manage our question and answer, I think.
That's lovely. Thank you so much, Izzy. It was really interesting, and I know I've already had one person asking for a copy of the slides. We are going to
Yes.
share that, and I think it was incredibly beneficial. I've got a couple of questions. Anybody else jumps in? So I'm just wondering whether the team actually took a photograph of the mat once it was completed to add into residents' daily records.
Yes, so that's the plan, is that when the mat is completed, they take a photograph, so you've essentially got a record of the conversation. And then there is also a very short written piece that they might do that summarises anything that maybe came up in the conversation that's not captured on the mat. And also if they feel there's any sub-mats or actions that need to happen afterwards. So we encourage them to fill that in. They were a lot better at uploading the photographs than they were at filling in the second bit of paper,
Yeah.
which we could
Surprise.
perhaps predict. Yeah.
One was the other question. Well, I've got two more questions. So the other one was, what level of training did April, your head of dementia, do? Was that level 3 training or?
Yes, so she went, I can't remember the exact title because it's April that did it rather than me.
Yeah.
Someone in the chat may well know it, but yes, it's the highest level. So basically that is she is trained to train others. And then those of us that are facilitators that are able to just deliver the conversations with individuals, we receive training from April.
Right, okay. So I've got
Sorry, Suzanne, I think we've got Melita, who I think is from Talking
okay,
Mats with
yeah,
her hand
Melita,
up.
do you want to unmute yourself?
Hi,
Perfect.
everybody. Yes, I am
Welcome,
from
Melita.
Talking Mats. Thank you. And thank you very much for allowing
Thank
me
you,
to come on.
Melita.
Fantastic, Isabel. That was so succinct as well for a presentation. But first of all, from a Talking Mats perspective, it's so lovely to see how you've been incorporating it within the organisation and across the organisations. That was really super. But just to address that question about the training, so April would have gone on to our licensed training course.
That's it. Thank you.
Which you can do after you've been trained on the foundation, and then that will allow you to train other staff in your organisation.
Excellent. Thank you.
So, Melita, so it's the foundation, because I noticed on your website there are 3 levels on the website.
Yes.
So would that be the level 3 and then the licensed training course?
There's the foundation course, which you would go on so that you could actually use the Talking Mat yourself.
Okay.
Then there are some advanced courses, and they're around specific topics. So we do have topics such as the Keeping Safe resource, which is around safeguarding, and that requires a little bit more extra training if you want to deliver that. But if you would like to become a licensed trainer, then that would be the licensed training, and you don't have to do the advanced course unless you are going to teach to the higher level training resources such as Keeping Safe.
Okay.
If anyone has any questions specifically about the training, then please just contact us at Talking Mats.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Now I've got a couple of questions in the chat, and one of these probably is better aimed at you, Melita, than possibly Izzy. Cheryl Henderson has said, are there many adaptations to make Talking Mats more dementia friendly?
Well, you can. We were talking earlier. Sorry, am I on mute? No, I'm not.
No.
We were talking earlier about the need to obviously be able to see the cards. You obviously can enhance the cards in terms of size. You can adapt the cards yourself so that you can make them more specific to the actual individual. So you don't have to use the Talking Mat symbols. You can create your own. And if you have familiar symbols already, then that obviously makes sense. You can increase the size of the mat. You don't actually have to use a mat as long as you have a frame for the conversation. So it could be a huge piece of card. You could use a wall. I've seen people use music stands and lean a mat against that. We do also have a digital Talking Mat, which you can use on a tablet or a PC or laptop, something like that. So you can use it with touch screen if that makes it any easier. So there are adaptations, but you'll find that you will personalize them as per the individual.
Okay, that's
Yes,
lovely.
and we certainly found that in terms of making any changes beforehand, there wasn't a great deal. That we started with the kind of raw tool, if you like, and that it's only once you're familiar with using it and thinking about a very specific conversation you want to have with someone that you might then be thinking, oh, okay, I need a symbol for that particular thing because there's not one in the pack, and then you might design one. But actually, other than being careful to make sure that you are approaching the conversation as an adult to an adult, which would be the same, with many other groups that you'd use a Talking Mat with. Other than that, I don't think there's a huge number of adaptations you need to make.
Okay. And I've got a lovely question, thanks to Di. Would Talking Mats be a useful tool for family carers too?
I think we're both nodding away there. You go first, Melita.
Yes, it's great to use with family members. It's really quite interesting, actually, if you do a talking map with the individual to find out their views, and then you do a talking map perhaps on the same topic to find out what the family members, and you will find that they're quite different. But it also does give that opportunity for you to give the voice to the family members as well. Often they may be relied upon to express what views they think the person needs, but it's rare that they perhaps, get that opportunity to have their own space as well. And just picking up Isabelle on what you were saying before about developing relationships, it's not always finding out what our wants and needs are. It's about developing that connection, that social belonging. So if you have that with the family members as well, then that really does create a great environment for having open and frank discussions about care planning.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Any other questions from anybody? I'll just give that a couple of moments.
We have a raised hand from Jim. Jim, do you want to come on?
Yeah, hi. So I'm familiar with talking mats. I work in dementia services now, but my background is in learning disability services. So I'm more familiar with talking mats, and I've seen them used with the regulators, because I know CQC have started to use them as part of their inspection process. I suppose the question for me is, in terms of your barriers, and obviously you mentioned some very clear barriers there, Izzy. In terms of the level of somebody's ability, for want of a better word, so where somebody is in relation to their dementia journey, how, and I suppose it comes back to that question about adaptation, really. But I think in some respects it comes down to personalising those symbols, or that symbolic approach, and like Melita said about making that very much about the individual. But was that a barrier that you found within the population we're working with?
I think what I'm echoing, I don't know whether I'm echoing for everyone else. Maybe it's just me. Sorry, I'll try not to be distracted.
No, Jim's turned his microphone off and it's gone away.
Sorry. So it was a barrier in that it was something we had to work our way through. But it was inevitable. I think there isn't a way that you could diagnose that beforehand and predict who would work with a talking mat and who wouldn't. One of the messages we sort of reinforce more now than we did at the beginning of talking mats is that you do have to use a certain amount of trial and error in working out who it's going to work with and not. Because whilst you might have somebody who has very few words and who is perceived as being quite late in their journey, sometimes the talking mat can be the thing that opens up the world for them. And equally, there can be some people who you think it's going to be superb for, but actually something about it doesn't work for that person, and they walk away very quickly or throw the cards at you very quickly to communicate that it's not working today. And so I think if you're working in a very person-centered way with people living with dementia anyway, it fits very well, because you're used to working in there. Well, let's do it gently and see what happens, and not take it personally if it doesn't work. And that's probably the approach to get the maximum out of talking mats. And as long as I think care staff and team have got that kind of approach, I think you do get the best out of it. But I don't think you could at the beginning go through, a set of care plans and say yes, no for talking mats, because I think it's much more subtle than that.
Thanks, Izzy. We have had a question from Shannon, and she asked specifically, what are the costs? So I suspect, Melita, this is one for you, and I suspect it needs to be broken down into what's the cost of a set of talking mats, what's the cost of the trainer, probably the accredited trainer. That's probably, I think, what's being asked.
Okay, I'm not going to have all of the answers to this on hand, but I can give you a rough idea. So if you undertake the foundation training, then that's something that you can actually do either face to face, or you can actually do it online, or if you're an organisation, you can do it through Zoom or through Teams as a team. And there are different costings attached to this. You can, on the first option, the online option, you can actually do that self-directed. So you'd have 6 weeks to complete the course at your own pace at any point during those 6 weeks. So there are different ways to be trained. So then in terms of the licensed trainer, we do offer training over Zoom over a couple of days to complete this, but we also do have some face-to-face training as well that happens throughout the year. In terms of symbols, when you undertake your training, you do receive a symbol set with your set training that you can use. Once you are trained, then the cost for purchasing additional symbols are reduced from what they would be if you were not trained. There are varying prices depending, like I say, on the different mode that you access the training. So what I would say is you are best going to our website and having a look under training and having a look at the different costings there that would suit yourselves. For example, if you were to undertake the training on your own as an individual, then that would be slightly different than if you were coming in as a group from a large organisation. So it all does vary. So I would redirect you to the website. I hope that helps.
Okay, I think that's brilliant. And Di has asked, as a family carer, she's interested in costs of training for families, if that's different from organisational costs.
Yes, if you're an individual or if you're attached to an organisation, if you're just family member, when I say I don't mean just family member, but if you're somebody outside of the kind of work environment, that there are slightly different price costings. So again, have a look on the website. If you're interested in one, just give us a ring or an email and we can have a chat to you about that. But we do encourage family members, definitely. There's some lovely examples of where, you know, husbands and wives have been talking mats with each other at home and help to identify issues. So, you know, we don't have to be professionals to undertake a talking mat. It is a conversation and it's just another tool to use.
Okay. That's brilliant. I'm just checking the chat to see if I've missed anything.
Suzanne, I've got one that's come direct to me. It says, how would these conversations be recorded and accessed by a hospital environment? That might be another one for Melita.
Good question. I guess it would probably, if you were talking about the conversations that had, say, happened within a care home and then the person transferred to hospital, it would depend on how that information was being transferred. As Suzanne asked earlier, one of the things that you do is you take a photograph of the mat, which very clearly actually shows you the outcome of that conversation. So I find it a lot quicker to get a whole load of information from looking at the picture than to look through the notes of a care plan to say, oh, this person likes this, doesn't like this, can do this, can do that. So potentially, I think talking mats could be quite powerful, particularly, for example, if you've had a conversation about, let's say, what a person can do by themselves or needs support to do. If you had that laid out very clearly on a mat, that's a single photograph included in documentation that went to hospital, I think would potentially be very useful because it very visually shows this person before they came into hospital was able to mobilise by themselves, take themselves to the toilets, and now they're not, you know, rather than having to root through lots of written texts. So it's going to depend on a lot of the things that also depend for written care records, but potentially makes it a little bit easier because it's visual.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, okay, that would be extremely useful before waiting for the This Is Me to be completed. So yeah, I think it would be very helpful and very visual. So yeah. Something I find that hospitals respond to anything new quite well.
Yes.
Okay, that's brilliant. Does anybody else have any other questions? I do have to reiterate that that was a really excellent presentation, Izzy, and really would like to extend our thanks from Dementia Publishing for the hard work that you put into it, but also being generous to share it.
Thank you.
It's a really interesting project, and I think, you know, that as we all explore and venture into different ways of communicating with people living with dementia, this is an additional tool in our toolbox.
Yeah.
So I think that's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been lovely to be able to share it.
Yeah. So I think from our perspective, that's probably about all. Again, thank you to everybody who's joined us this afternoon. I hope you've enjoyed the webinar. As I've said before, the slides will be shared. And on behalf of Dementia Publishing, I think that's all for this afternoon.
We've just got someone's just put their hand up.
A whole load of questions now.
Margaret's just put her.
Thank you. I've just I live in Cornwall, and we have quite a few memory cafes around Cornwall, and I was just wondering, has anybody tried it to use it with people living with dementia from a memory cafe point of view?
Not that I know of, and I can see Melita's got a similar answer from the look on her face, but I'm actually going to link this to answer one of the other questions that's appeared in the chat. On the website, on the Talking Mats website, you can actually see a list of anywhere where they've done research into the use of Talking Mats. So if there had been a project using Talking Mats in memory cafes, it would appear on that section of the website. Off the top of my head, I don't think they have, because obviously I pay attention to the ones that are particularly relevant to dementia, and it hasn't come up. But I think it's an interesting area to explore, because I think particularly looking at the use of Talking Mats earlier in the journey of dementia, and does that mean it retains its helpfulness for longer, could be a very, very useful thing to look at, because maybe people learn to get used to the symbols and the way that you use them. So potentially a very interesting area of work. But yeah, Dementia Publishing's added the little link onto the website there for you to see the research network and the publications.
Okay, thank you very much.
Can I just also add, we're always interested to hear about people's experience of using Talking Mats. So if somebody does want to trial or use one in a memory cafe, we would love to, you know, share a blog with us that we could perhaps share forward. Then that would be really great. We're always interested. But yes, on the website we do have a list of all the different research and publications that have gone into Talking Mats, if you want to have a look at those.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and I think Amy has just shared a comment. When working with people with dementia, considering sensory loss is important and may help with engagement with Talking Mats. Are their ears blocked with wax? Do they have a hearing assessment report in their care plan, so you know what their hearing levels are? 90% of care home residents have a hearing loss, but this is largely unidentified. They check the care plan. I think that there is, we're certainly at KUK doing some work around reversible hearing loss and the use of microsuction. I think more organisations at the moment are looking, particularly post-pandemic, at the issues surrounding not having hearing checks during the acute phases of the pandemics, and also that district nursing teams aren't doing ear irrigation very much at all now. So I think there are ways of us actually supporting people to hear better, but also to see better in terms of the size of the Talking Mats.
And one of the things that we do within our training and linking it to our dementia communication training generally is, of course, that for any kind of communication, you need to get the basics right. And that means checking that you're compensating for any sensory difficulties, making sure that hearing aids are working and glasses are clean. And of course, as this person rightly says in their comment, making sure that the environment is conducive to having a meaningful conversation, not trying to do, whether it's a conversation or whether it's a Talking Mat conversation, not trying to do it in a busy lounge when there's 27 other things going on.
Yeah. And I think the other question, which is probably more aimed at Melita, is from Anne Pemberton, is, are Talking Mats used in acute hospitals?
Yes, there are examples. We have people that come onto our courses that are working in acute hospitals. So yes.
Good. I daren't leave now, just in case, that stimulates more questions. So we're here for the afternoon. But no, I think that's it. If there are any further questions, you can always contact us via Dementia Publishing, or Izzy and I, so directly. So I think that, again, it's been a really useful conversation this afternoon. And thank you again to Izzy, and thank you for Dementia Publishing for hosting this event.
And thank you to Melita as well for answering the questions I couldn't. I really appreciate it.
Oh,
Perfect.
thank you, everybody.
Thank
Very
you.
good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll close now.
Good.
There we go. I think we've got 1 or 2 people still with us.
Still trying to find the exit button.
Yeah, trying to find the leave button.
Yes.